everyone, and thank you for the invitation to share this contribution, which is part of my ongoing research on performance practices and epistemologies rooted along the edges of southern Italy. From a situated perspective in southern Sardinia, an epistemic and geographical field in dialogue with shores farther south and with the global south, and as an island that evokes a liquid imaginary for rethinking borders, this proposal explored the potential of artistic research in the performing arts to activate relational, affective, and critical forms of knowledge and ecologies in contexts shaped by necropolitics. By necropolitics, I refer to Achille Mbembe's concept of the sovereign power to kill and to decide who has the right to live and who must die, making death central to sovereignty. In this sense, the Mediterranean stands at the center of the reflection as a space haunted by forms of necropower, by the subordination of life to death words, by armaments, factories, toxic substances, ecocides, epistemicides, and topography of cruelty. These forces not only determine social histories and the destiny of people, they also configure matter's very notion and the agentivity of spaces, and here, of the artistic practices that investigate them. From this point of view, the Mediterranean is not a neutral geography or a mere exchange zone, but a field of friction where asymmetric epistemic genealogy confront each other. Performance and the performing arts become sensitive, spectral, and critical devices capable of connecting bodies, memories, and environments through situated nonlinear research. In the case studies I will present, the Mediterranean is understood dually as a political space and as material body, a haunted territory marked by its own agentic charge, inhabited and constituted by dissolved bodies, spectral matter, residues, and lives both present and absent. The sea's liquid space moves away from crystalline, postcard imagery to become a dense viscous substance that agitates and transforms, undoing the exoticization imaginary of tourist routes. It exposes structural asymmetries between the norths and souths of the world, between old and new colonialism, and the ways marginalized territories of modernity are left to die or occupied by industries of death. By violating borders between art and academia, the case studies artists trace concrete experiences of transcorporeality and of liquid edges, revisiting the impossibility of containing margins and conceptual vortices that generate epistemic fields of the abyss and collapse. Observing territories marked by extractive and epistemic violence, the identified performance and dance practices amplify the Mediterranean unauthorized grammar, quoting Chambers and Cariello, often expressed through women's situated knowledge, relations to the magical world, abyssal and haunted listening and voice, and silenced history. The case studies I will present are Campus Sud, a radical pedagogy symposium, The Last Lamentation by the artist Valentina Medda, an artistic project centered on Mediterranean mourning and the sea as both archive, body, and corpse, soaked by dissolved memories, Ecology of Listening, Attuning, Resonating with Sulcis by researcher and artist Nicola Di Croce, a practice engaging ecological violence in an area marked by depopulation, extractivism, economic depression, which determined the building of a weapons export factory. These are examined through methodologies developed within performance epistemologies, asking how artistic research can unframe knowledge by intersecting the colonial and neo-materialistic perspective. We work on three interlinked practices: radical pedagogy as a situated knowledge in Mediterranean territory, generating embodied epistemologies from its edges and wave through a Gramscian perspective, performance as a tool for probing body-borders relation and for confronting the dissolution of the borders itself in the experience of the sea's liquid body within a theoretical horizon of transcorporeality. Acoustic sonic research into listening and attunement, approach as theoretical as well and as aesthetic frames, aligned with a mediatic extrasensory experience of perception. Each of these practices engage the Mediterranean not as a backdrop, but as active interlocutor, a haunted and adjunctive participant in the performance research project. These processes take shape in dialogue with the nature of the Mediterranean, its coast and southern Sardinia, a ontological place where the past is not simply preserved but persists as a spectral presence that informs and deforms our present, enabling the emergence of historiographies and narratives crushed and erased by the dominant ones. The failure to recognize the persistence of a southern question, and specifically Mediterranean question, produced perceptual obfuscation in local cultural history, an insular depression, a loss of presence, as the ethnologue Ernesto De Martino underlined, on a territorial scale. Work with archives and ancestrality reveals a fraught relation to the past and tradition, often framed by impenetrable memories that exclude minor voices, sometimes channeled in rigid identity forms, signaling a narrow, tortuous passage to modernity, a modernity both desired and suffered, first through Savoyard invasion and later through mass touristification. The pathways identified here attend to the complexity of a liquid territory and the Mediterranean haunted by its losses, by structural extractivism and by epistemic violence, reflecting the violence of other Souths in a continual coast-to-coast dialogue. Resonating voices still present and alive in the structural silencing of the South and of subaltern cultures. Within cultural mourning knowledge that does not reproduce, memories falling into oblivion, the spectre of the population, toxic detritus strewn along beaches subject to NATO military experiments and famines that once drove people to eat earth less than a century ago, treats are lost in a place to which one no longer wishes to return. The refusal to enter a past that is perhaps too near testify an unalienable pain. Recent artistic research only partially reverses this trend. Rather than surrender the past to a geography, it looks forward toward the present without forgetting. It coexists with ghosts, tunes to them as living subterranean question, listening to territorial echoes along a multilinear, non-progressive temporality. The past emerges through the figure of ghosts, methodological companions rather than mere objects of study, nurturing an outlook attuned to structural violence against land and sea, against the coast. In a spiraling temporality, a landscape informed by the living and no longer living, by human and more than human, opens to necro-writings, as Cristina Rivera Garza quotes. Multi-voiced communal writings among the living and between living and death, embedded in ecos and territories, in visual, symbolic, and more often material landscapes where necropolitics take form. Necro here, unsettled power, while proposing a different adjectivity that destabilizes bodily materiality and the primacy of the living. Artistic research thus disappropriates its own signature, becoming an instrument of attunement, of capture, and haunted listening, as they do say. Let me begin with Campo Sud, a visionary camp, a Gramsci project, multi-titled case studies, a project initiated in southern Sardinia in 2017. It was conceived to revisit the Sardinian philosopher Antonio Gramsci's legacy, not through commemoration, but through contemporary artistic and pedagogical practices. Campus Sud takes Gramsci's ideas of praxis and situated knowledge as a point of departure to think the Mediterranean question within the global south. Its methodology deliberately blurs the boundaries between theory, practice, and community action. Performances, collective workshop, artistic residencies, and urban and non-urban intervention merge into a single liquid field of inquiry. Working from Sardinia, a peripheral and insular context, Campus Sud explores what it means to produce knowledge from a place of structural isolation, where disconnection itself becomes a condition of research. Here, unlearning, in Gayatri Spivak's sense, becomes an act of epistemic disobedience, to dismantle inherited frameworks and to create openings for new conversation between local and global South epistemologies. Over time, Campus Sud has evolved into a nomadic platform, moving from urban centers to remote islands, tracing routes that connect Sardinia with Tunisia, Tabarka, and other southern shores. In this movement, the islands become both laboratory and method, a metaphor for working within boundaries that are always shifting, permeable, and relational. The second case studies, the last lamentation by Valentina Medda, takes the Mediterranean as a site of mourning and transformation. Winner of the Italian Council Award, this project engaged with the ancient tradition of the lament, reimagined as a contemporary, site-specific ritual for the sea itself, conceived as both archive, body, and corpse. Medda's work draws on the philosophical horizon of Judith Butler, Astrida Neimani's hydrofeminism, and Stasia Lymon's notion of transcorporeality. In this framework, the sea is not backdrop, but an active agent, a breathing, resonating body that enters the performer's soul. Through a collective of 12 women and vocal research led by Claudia Ciceroni, the project explored breath as the minimal shared unit of life and matter. The works avoids word and narrative, instead cultivating a phoneme, a prelinguistic voice intertwined with the sounds of the sea, the wind, and human respiration. In collaboration with the musician Gaspare Sammartano and field recordist Attila Faravelli, the last lamentation becomes a space of acoustic hunting, where human and a human voice intermingle. These sea voices, as Medda conceived it, mourns not only lost life, but also lost ways of knowing. The silenced epistemology of the South, erased by colonial and modern narratives. The performance power lies in the capacity to transform mourning into method, to turn grief into an embodied epistemic gesture. As Ilania Kaleo notes, centering the Mediterranean in this way destabilized the idea of a singular, white, Western Mediterranean identity, opening instead to a decolonial, fluid and haunted relationality. I shared just some moments, a teaser of the work that became also a video artwork. This kind of lament is the lament of the wind, it's the voice of the wind intercepted by, captured by Attila Faravelli and Gaspare Sammartano, who merge with the human breathing as a common breath. This work was realized for the first time in Lebanon, in the Beirut Art Center as the first part of research, and then arriving in Sardinia through a research in the inner part of Sardinia where the laments are almost died as a ritual, and it became sort of chant from coast to coast. The third case study I would like to introduce to you is a tuning resonating with sulcis by the artist Nicola Di Croce, produced in the framework of Ecologies of Listening. This work was developed in collaboration with local communities in the former mining district of Sulcis, southern Sardinia, an area scared by economic decline and the presence of a weapons factory exporting bombs to Gaza. Di Croce research, grounded in sound studies and spatial planning, explore how listening can become an act of political and epistemic repair. His approach combines field recordings, embodied listening, and community activation, methods of what he calls post-human attunement. Together with choreographer Maurizio Saio, he engaged residents, church members, artists, and a group of shamanic activist women in a collective session held directly in front of the weapons factory. As the factory silence marked shift change, the group responded not with protests, chants, but with resonance, soft, sustained tones that intertwined prayer, lament, and dissonance. This performative act does not seek a resolution. It enacts what I call epistemic disarmament, a listening that refutes mastery, and knowing that precedes true vulnerability. Rather than an archive, the work becomes a performative testimony, a living resonance that unsettles the institutional silence surrounding violence and complicity. As Derrida remains us, the archive is always a question of future, a demand for response, a promise, a responsibility. Di Croce works reactivates this demand through the ear, transforming listening into a communal act of potential history. This product is the factory of weapons. And this is the mixed group of choir and shamanic women that they assume to receive the voices from the lands that they need to repair, they need to care of. Finally, we'd like to return to the notion of epistemic disarmament, which runs through all this project. By this I mean an aesthetic and a methodological posture that resists the assertive, extractive tendencies of dominant research paradigms. It is a form of knowing that proceeded through listening, resonance, and vulnerability, through what David Tubb calls sinister resonances, where the ear becomes attuned to distant signals, to ghosts, to what is almost lost. In this sense, artistic research in performance can operate as a counter-archive, not an accumulation of knowledge, but a practice of unknowing, not an assertion of mastery, but a gesture of care and attentiveness. This is particularly urgent in contexts such as the Mediterranean, where the politics of death and silence are material, daily realities, as the necropolitics of Gaza are showing. To listen, to attune, to resonate, these are not metaphors, but political acts of solidarity with the living and the non-living, with humans and more than humans, with the gods that populate our shared sea. Let me close by saying that to think from the Mediterranean today is to think from its margins, from the shore where the world's inequalities are most visible and most audible. Performance artistic research, in this view, is not about producing new objects or artifacts, but about unlearning and unwording, slowing down the imperial rhythm of progress and allowing the sea-haunted temporality to teach us how to know otherwise. It is to work to mourning as method, through listening as ethics and justice, and through disarmaments and epistemology and aesthetics. As echoes travel from coast to coast, they remind us that The Mediterranean is not a space that divides, it is a resonant body that connects, travels, and transforms the present.